Hi, it's Dr. Douglas Ozier here, your Kitsilano area registered psychologist. In this video, I want to share with you some of the really important things that I've learned about emotions over the years, about what they are, why they're so important to our sense of health and well-being, and about how they can go from being a source of health to becoming something that causes us suffering and distress. So the first thing I guess I'd want you to know about emotions is that there are actually different kinds or classes of emotions. First, there are primary emotions. Then there are secondary emotions, which are kind of like emotions about primary emotions. And lastly, there's anxiety, which is kind of a class unto itself. In terms of primary emotions, different theorists argue that there are different numbers, usually between 5 and 9 of them. But in my practice, the most important primary emotions, or some of them, are anger, fear, sadness, excitement, joy. So, what are they for, primary emotions? Well, the first thing is that they've been around for millions of years, and that we share them with all other mammals. So they're obviously very important information that comes to us through our bodies. And all of these different primary emotions have evolved to serve 3 functions. The first one is to tell us that some kind of thing is important to us. The second one is to give us the right kind of adaptive action tendency, a way of moving our body, an energy in our body, and a way of thinking, which will help us to respond most appropriately or skillfully to the thing the emotion is telling us is important to us. And the third function is that they help us to communicate to other people in our life about what we're feeling and, most importantly, what we're needing. So I want to use the example of sadness. Sadness tells us, first of all, when something in our life which is precious or meaningful to us has been lost or damaged. Second thing, the adaptive action tendency of sadness is to pull in. That's so that we can take a bit of time out of life and soothe ourselves while we heal or get over from the loss of whatever it is that's been lost or damaged. And in terms of the communication to other people in our life, is to say to them, hey, I'm suffering right now. I'd really appreciate it if you could come and also soothe me or help me to heal from this loss that I've suffered. So, I'm going to put these primary emotions right down here at the bottom. These are primary emotions, and our example that we're dealing with is sadness. So these emotions are meant to inform, as I said, through adaptive action tendency our behavior, which I'll put up here in this corner. And now I want to talk about the example of an imaginary client named Dave. Dave grew up in an environment where it was okay when he was a kid as a little guy to cry and be upset. His parents weren't freaked out by that, or they didn't tell him that he shouldn't have those feelings. They just helped him to try, they'd soothe him or help him to soothe himself, send him the message that that's okay. So imagine Dave has, had a big project at work, something that he's really excited about, something he's really put his heart and soul into, and he's pretty sure that his boss is going to pick his proposal over his colleagues. And he goes to work that morning all excited, and then, much to his surprise and disappointment, his boss picks his colleagues. So what does he feel? He keeps a straight face, keeps a good face at work. He's in a professional context, that makes sense. But inside, he's feeling really sad. Something that's important to him, something he dreamed or hoped about, has been lost to him. So while he's keeping a brave face outside, he's not judging himself for feeling sad. He knows that he's sad. He's just kind of holding it together until he gets home. And he gets home, and his wife says, hey, honey, how did it go with the proposal presentation today? And he just says, you know what? I didn't get it. I feel really disappointed and let down. And she says, oh, honey, I'm so sorry. He says, look, can I just have a hug? And so she gives him a hug, and he feels better. And as he gets the support and the soothing that he needs in himself, he notices that he's and then he says, hey, what do you want to do for dinner tonight? And he just kind of realizes, maybe not always that quickly, but in general terms. Now, from his wife's perspective, what's she feeling? She's feeling needed, she's feeling valued, she's feeling like it's okay to ask him what's going on. And then that wonderful feeling of offering something that's been meaningful for him and having it be received. Okay. The emotions did exactly what they were supposed to do, right? They helped him to recognize that this was important to him and to take some time out to kind of feel down about it and to ask for support from a loved one. But now I want to go back to that diagram that I was talking about earlier, because it's a bit more complicated, which is why I can make a living as a psychotherapist. Imagine that Dave, instead of being brought up in the environment I mentioned, had been brought up in an environment where every time Dave, as a 3-year-old boy, cried because he hurt himself or he lost something or another kid made fun of him, his dad said, Dave, stop crying, man up, boys don't cry, don't be such a wimp. What's going to happen to Dave? Well, here's what's going to happen. Over time, pretty quickly often, Dave is going to get this sense that there's something really shameful about him when he's sad. So he's going to start feeling shame for feeling sad. And that's most typically going to lead to something else. And none of this is conscious, of course. It's going to get scary for him to feel sad. Because when I feel sad, I feel like there's something wrong with me. And when I feel there's something wrong with me, I get terrified that my dad's going to kind of abandon me. And I love my dad. I don't want my dad to kind of like go away. So that very emergence of sadness gets in the brain wired again and again with these what are called secondary emotions. Emotions about the original sadness. Often shame and fear, which we'll put here. So, as Dave grows, because those two things have been linked together in his mind, what happens when Dave goes to work that morning, is hopeful for the proposal, and doesn't get it? Underneath, very quickly, Dave feels the sadness, but immediately that co-activates that messy ball of fear and shame, and Dave, like anyone else, does not want to feel that stuff, especially the shame. So what does Dave do? Dave puts tension in his body, he pushes out of his mind, and what comes in its place is the third class of emotion. It's anxiety. Dave may have no idea all day why he's so on edge, or why he's feeling so kind of anxious, or walking on, eggshells. All he's aware of is this kind of diffuse general anxiety. So now, Dave comes home. Same deal. His wife says, "Hey honey, how did it go with the proposal presentation today?" But that offer from his wife of compassion and interest, what does it do? It brings up the sadness, which brings up the shame and the fear, which brings up the anxiety. And Dave, like everyone else, doesn't like to feel that anxiety either. So he replaces the actual direct behavior, the sadness, which is say, "I had a hard day, I'd love a hug," with what's called a defensive behavior. Now we all have these, but in some cases, probably like Dave's, they're so strong that they can actually tap into the useful information in the original sadness. A really typical example would be something like laughing and smiling, saying, "Yeah, old Peterson, he's a real treat, isn't he? Hey, I'm going to go get a beer." Or he might say, "Why are you always bugging me when I get home?" Using a kind of prickly defensiveness, unconsciously, as a way of pushing his wife away so that he can avoid any need to tap into and experience that underlying terrible feeling of sadness, which makes him feel so bad about himself. So, if Dave were to work in therapy, with me, a lot of where we would start is really up here, helping him to recognize those little moments, either at home with his partner or with girlfriends, or even with me in the therapy relationship, where he begins to become curious about, he's smiling, but it doesn't feel like a real smile. It's a defensive smile. Its function is to turn something else off. That's kind of the first piece, just to get real curious in a compassionate, non-judgmental way, because again, we all do this. But what's going to happen when Dave starts doing that is then the anxiety is going to start coming up more, and the fear and the shame. So the next real task in the work together will be to help Dave to recognize those kinds of uncomfortable, non-helpful feelings and learn how to regulate or soothe them so he can put them aside. And then finally, coming back to the actual experience of the sadness itself, and then in a skillful way and in a slow, measured way, which will be tolerable for Dave, learning how to go home, and when his partner says something like that, instead of falling into these traps that lead to the same old place that push her away, end up leaving him feeling anxious and dissatisfied and leaving them feeling very disconnected, he might just say, "I had a bad day today, honey, I'd like a hug." Boy, that's a lot, right? Now it invites her back into this, they get to kind of like meet each other's needs, Dave gets soothed, and then they go and they have dinner, right? Instead of this whole evening becoming fraught with this tension and these unspoken things. So, each of the for a lot of people it's sadness and anger underneath, which they might have problems with, but for all of us it's something different. Anyway, I hope that this general introduction to emotions, how they function, and how working in therapy can help them go from becoming a source of stress and distress to a source of meaning and connection has been helpful for you. Thanks for watching. I'm Dr. Douglas Ozier.